Hey everybody, I'm hoping you can hear me. I'm pretty sure you can. There's no reason you can't. I've got 10:30 on my clock. We're at about 10 viewers, 11 viewers right now. I'm just going to give it a few minutes as people kind of climb on, so just give it a few. Oh, okay, I'll go ahead and get started. We're got fewer number of viewers today. I think our numbers maxed out at around 19 on Monday. We're at 13 now. And I'll kind of keep my eye on those numbers as we go forward. I'm very curious as to how many people are chiming in. I know a number of you are pairing up, which is cool. Anyway, welcome, Wednesday, March 11th. Hope you're all doing well. It's good to, kind of see everybody in a small viewer mode. I can't see any of you, or hear any of you. So I just want to kind of get rolling today. We're going to be taking a further look at policy and regulatory issues and how we can kind of understand those two in a cloud computing environment. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. All right, I think this is one of my complaints is that you can't see me while I'm sharing my screen. At least I don't think you can. My camera appears to be off. So anyway, today I'm going to be talking about this kind of disambiguating or kind of trying to separate regulation and policy. I think one of the things that we'll see is that we can kind of separate them analytically, to think about regulation on one hand and policy on the other, but at the same time they end up kind of collapsing, on one another. So they are a little bit hard to separate from the two. So a few comments, as I always try to like to do. Today is Wednesday, March 11th. Policy and regulation. That's today. A little less than a week now, we'll do the review I also obviously want to talk about this week, and that, you know, what we talk about on Monday regarding this week will have an impact on the exam. And then Wednesday, a week from today, is the exam. Again, it's online. You'll have a 24-hour window to do it. It'll be short answer. You'll have in the neighborhood of 10 questions. You have an hour and 15 minutes to get it done. It did appear, don't hold me to this, but it did appear that you can start it pretty late in the evening, but as you know, like you could start it at 11:30 at night, and then you're still going to be okay in terms of, it's not, I don't think it auto submits for you at midnight. So you do have the hour and 15 as long as you start it before midnight on Wednesday, you know. All right, so assignment 2 is due Friday, this coming Friday, just a couple days now. So it was supposed to be due today, we moved it back 2 days. I've given feedback on probably 4 or so, maybe 5 papers. So talk to somebody on Hangouts as well. So trying to work with you to get these papers in pretty good working order. So happy to work with you. Again, you'll submit it on Blackboard, it's due Friday at midnight. And then if you want me to take a look at it, send it to me via email as an attachment, and I'll download it and make comments and then just send it back to you as a document. So that's a little bit easier for me. A couple notes from Monday. So these are great. This is exactly what I was hoping for. So one was to increase the font size, which I've done. I don't know if you can tell, but the font size is larger because apparently the window that you're using to view this stuff is kind of small. So, or the font came across as kind of grainy. One of the reasons I'm telling you this is because I think a number of you are going to run similar meetings to what we're doing here. These are just notes that came from you as the viewers. Get a headset microphone. It's not here. It was been ordered, but I was hoping it would show up, and it has not. So apparently, the onboard microphone on my laptop is serviceable. I think was maybe, I don't know if that was the term that was used, but anyway, that was what I read. Email is, so anyway, headset microphone. Email is pretty tough from my perspective. So, you know, for example, I would say something like, "Can you hear me?" Do you remember that question that I asked on Monday? Well, that resulted in about 25 emails. I just got an email right here. Oh, people are coming in. All right, so, and it creates this pretty long email chain for me, which is great. And I tried to work through it at the end of class to make sure that everybody was addressed, but it was hard for me to do email in real time with the class, even with those 2-minute breaks. So that was tough. That was from my own. There was a suggestion to use the chat window in your Gmav email. So that's a little screenshot over there. So you have your inbox chat. I've got mine open. Somebody could send me a chat if you want. That might be a little bit better. So the real-time communication is something that's a little bit harder to kind of negotiate. I'm also trying to use freely available tools. So there are other tools out there. So for example, Citrix GoToMeeting is a tool out there, but it only has a 100-day free trial, and then you get into a payment plan. And what I'm trying to do is use freely available tools through Google, through email, through our stuff that we have at UNO to try to build this environment using things that I think that you would be able to use in the future, no problem, or you could use for your groups, you know, moving forward. And for those of you, smart Alex, that tried to drop tables from S3, yeah, it's not a relational database, so you can't do that. So let's see, I just got a chat from Adam, and I'm not seeing it on my screen. So I got it on my phone, but not on my screen. So well, let's try to get another one. Sent a message on Hangouts. A couple people are trying to help me out. Help me out here. I'm not seeing the mess. Oh wait. I'm seeing them on Google Chat. Yes. So Adam, yes, that did work on Google Chat. So don't sweat it. Let's not sweat it in terms of the real-time kind of feedback. Let's just continue to use email for now. If you have questions, that's okay with me. All right, so let's get into a little bit of content. So security, again, I just want to, without giving you all the sub bullets here that I've been doing kind of day after day after day. Security, again, we have motivation issues behind security. This affects organizational structure and decision-making and authority and control. You can check prior slides on that. TCO that we looked at last week, again, we have motivational issues. We have organizational structure issues when it comes to TCO. I think that TCO helped reveal. And then decision-making. I think one of the real compelling things that came out of total cost of ownership is it opened up a new line of decision-making, which was whether or not we actually make the move. And that really kind of was still kind of ringing with me as evident from a week ago on Wednesday when we did that in-class activity. So remember that whole idea that I'm saying you're involved in a decision-making process that didn't exist before. So it's not just the decision-making on how we allocate resources or how we manage infrastructure. It's the decision-making process to actually move towards this new managed model. Policy and regulatory. So I've been pairing these two things for the last week. And what I need to try to do today is kind of separate these two things so that you can see them side by side and really, kind of think about them as partners with each other, all right? So, and let's see. Bring my smiling face back up. So the idea here is that I want to kind of say, we've got policy on one hand, we've got regulatory on the other, and together they kind of form a collective that we've got to think about when we think about cloud computing. So I'll say this several times throughout the day, but really what regulatory is, when I talk about regulatory, is they are the regulatory environments that are set up by federal agencies. So in terms of the management of data, so for example, if we have FERPA, which is the management of educational records, so say for elementary school kids and we have to manage their own personal data, there are federal regulations on how we manage that data, all right? Regulations, regulatory environment. HIPAA, and I'll talk more about HIPAA. So these are federal regulations on how we manage healthcare patient records. All right, so we've got to attend to that regulatory environment. We also have PCI, which is the credit card regulatory environment. Now that's not set up federally. That's set up through kind of an industry consortium. So you can have regulation come government-wise. You can have it come like industry-wise, industry consortium-wise. But the idea is the regulatory is kind of a high-level, must-do kind of thing, or you must attend to these particular features when it comes to managing data. The policy then, the policy is what I do as a client or a cloud provider to respond to the regulatory environment. So the policies that I would put in place to respond to, say, FERPA are different policies than I would put in place to respond to HIPAA, are different policies than I would put in place to respond to PCI. So each of the regulatory environments kind of has different styles of thresholds that I need to respond to, and then my policies are how I respond to that. So that's what I'm talking about when I talk about regulatory and policy. So I'm gonna go back to the slide deck here. So I talk about policy and regulatory and policy. So regulatory is oftentimes motivated by clients. So the types of clients that are using the cloud infrastructure, they're gonna bring a certain environment with them. They participate in HIPAA, or they participate with the MPAA, or they participate with FERPA, or they participate with credit cards. So that's brought to us by the clients, and then the data that I have to protect. Policy is then motivated pretty much by standard system administration. So when we were looking at the S3 stuff, if you recall, coming back here, if I go to screen share again, and hold on. When I come back to this, you remember this is really a policy window. So this is not a regulatory window. So these are my policy choices. Maybe that's not quite the right word. These are the environments that I would implement policy on. So we looked at S3, for example, if you recall S3, right down over here. All right, and I showed you a very simple policy with respect to just logging in and then having access to S3, all right? So people are chatting me. Oh, I see that. You see that too. All right, so make sure that I get all the slides out. So again, security, total cost of ownership. I am sharing that, all right? Yep, security, total cost of ownership, and policy and regulatory. So organizational structure, so the infrastructure management, if I was to move down, infrastructure management is distributed across, my company and the cloud company. I think you're pretty comfortable with that concept anymore because we've seen it with TCO and with security. The decisions become embedded in the client needs. So there are policy decisions that need to be made based on the client regulatory needs. And part of regulatory management is now paid for. So it's paid for as kind of a commodity item. And then social responsibility, I as the client of a cloud computing service now have responsibilities of my own, as well as the cloud provider having responsibilities of my own. And what we're going to do is kind of take a look at today is how those policies kind of responsibilities get distributed between myself as the client, and my cloud provider. All right. I've been making this point all along that infrastructure has become commoditized, but it's a non-differentiating technology for me, and it's low on the stack. And in fact, when it comes to cloud computing, it's typically infrastructure that's almost always commoditized. But along with this becomes kind of this commodity management of regulatory issues. So you have to be okay with that as well, that if I'm going to move my infrastructure into a commodity position, and that infrastructure has to have policy on it that responds to a particular regulatory environment, then the management or the policies behind those regulatory issues become commoditized as well. I pull the whole thing, so I can't just commoditize part of this conversation. I'm kind of commoditizing the entire thing. So just got to understand that as I move physical pieces of hardware away from me, along with it goes policy, and along with it goes that regulatory environment to which that policy must respond. All right. So there are two things that I've been talking about, and this was a response. This was a response just to kind of talk a little bit about these regulatory environments. So I added a slide here, which is HIPAA. So HIPAA is this idea that says, it's been around for a while, that says I have to protect patient healthcare information. So I need to keep that information confidential. And as we move into a highly wired, highly online environment, this is a challenge, right? So I have to keep that confidential and secure. So PCI is actually along the same lines, that I have a set of requirements designed to ensure that all companies, process, store, and transmit information, and they maintain this secure and kind of confidential environment. And so HIPAA really applies to healthcare organizations. PCI DSS is for merchant organizations. We could also take a look at FERPA. I've been mentioning this one, which deals with educational environments. So each one of these is kind of fundamentally the same thing, which is protecting the confidentiality of data to the respective industry from which they come, right? So HIPAA coming from healthcare, protect healthcare data. PCI DSS coming from credit card, protect credit card data. FERPA coming from education, protect educational information. Now, in this case, what we have here, what we have, if we have HIPAA and PCI, HIPAA, I'll come back to me. HIPAA is it's a federally regulated, a federally dictated regulatory environment. PCI DSS is not the same type of federal origin. It's more of an industry standard origin. So the regulatory environments can come from a variety of different places, but they're still regulatory environments nonetheless. Okay, I'll come back to my slides here. All right, so HIPAA today, it's becoming manageable and a fairly standardized process. I'd say back in '96, it was really, it was almost impossible to deal with. It was really hard to deal with. So it is still really complex on how this information is shared. The problem is, and you'll see this not just with HIPAA, but for those of you that have had jobs or continue to have jobs, this is a continued issue, that have jobs right now, that the requirements don't necessarily map to the engineering. So what I want doesn't necessarily map to my engineering capabilities of what I can do. So there's this tendency of kind of separating the process of what I want to do from the technology of what I can do. This isn't just a problem with HIPAA. I'm sure a lot of you have run into this, especially when you're doing analysis and design. These are the things that I do want, these are the things I can do. So, but I would say that technology, since '96 has really helped kind of catch up with the HIPAA process. And I would even say that the HIPAA processes have responded to technology environments. So if I was to look at HIPAA with respect to kind of these layers of responsibility, right? So I've got, I'll come back to my stop sharing. So I've got these layers of responsibility on managing HIPAA data. It's not just about HIPAA data in just like a folder of data. It's not that simple, right? We have a stack that we have to deal with. So if I was to come back and look at these layers of responsibility, HIPAA says that there are physical safeguards that need to be implemented, facility management, physical contingency plans. These are the actual pieces of technology that I can hold in my hand. I then have these general technical safeguards, and you guys should all be familiar with this, or everybody in the class should be familiar with this. So we have encryption, right, which secure sockets. We have say perhaps MD5 encryption at a local level. We have backups. We have instance access, so how we get to the instances through SSH, and then we have application-specific technical safeguards. So we have authentication, which if you recall, S3 would be our application-specific issue here. So we did this with S3. We set up authentication. Remember Ed Smith 1, 2. Those are shut down, by the way. Mike Jones 1, 2. So we have authentication that we set up. Not great in our case, but set up. I have access controls. So do you remember the policy setting that I set up with S3? So my ability to provide you read-only access, or to provide you full administrative rights on S3. So I have access controls on not just the specific S3 thing, the S3 application, but actually all of those applications. Remember EC2, CloudFront, RDS, DynamoDB, there's this whole Redshift, there's this whole suite of things that Amazon has. And then we provide access control, policy level control on those. So if I was to take a look at this, and I'm still showing my slides, I'm hoping. Yep. So if I was to take a look at this, Amazon, what I'm saying is Amazon is responsible for the facility management in the physical contingency plans. That's what I'm giving to them. And then me, smiling face there, I'm responsible for the general technical safeguards and the application-specific technical safeguards. So this is where we start to kind of get these layers of responsibility. Now I can shift these layers. They are shiftable. And so the idea here is that, I don't know, I think some of you, I'm going to come back to myself here. Some of you have kind of heard this idea of infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. So this is kind of a way that you can distribute cloud infrastructure between the cloud organization and me as a client, okay? So if I was to come back to the slide deck here, get there, and here what I'm saying, with respect to software as a service, let's start over here on the right side. And we have not really looked at software as a service in this class, but this would say that my vendor or my cloud provider would handle the networking, the storage, the servers, up the entire stack, all the way to the application layer, right? I would say that the most common software as a service tool that you have and that you use on a daily basis probably is your mail. So Gmail is a great software as a service example where you really don't handle any of the operating system, obviously any of the data, any of the applications, any of the virtualization, any of that kind of stuff. So where we've been looking at is moving kind of over here to the left, which is infrastructure and platform as a service. Where we reside, you know, these aren't set in stone. So it's not saying that platform as a service, I manage the applications and the data. The cloud provider handles all runtime, middleware, operating system, virtualization, all the way down. Or infrastructure as a service stops at middleware, and I don't do the OS. I mean, these can shift a little bit, but I think infrastructure as a service is really kind of highlighting that I control a bit deeper into the stack than I do with platform as a service, than I do as software as a service. And this can shift, all right? And in fact, it can shift based on my organizational structure. It can shift based on my organizational needs. It can shift based on kind of where I'm at maturity-wise from a cloud deployment perspective, where I am from a human resources perspective. Do I have people that can manage operating systems? Do I not? So these are very, very kind of nebulous, that's not the right word, shiftable layers, okay, where I can kind of move up and down. All right. So if you kind of look at this other way, it would say that software as a service at the top, I have pretty limited control over pretty much everything. Platform as a service, I start shifting to the left towards the client, this level of control and responsibility with my cloud service provider on the right, client on the left. And then infrastructure as a service, really kind of where I start kind of, you know, taking over a little bit more control over the stack. So I'm gonna stop here. This set of slides, I think, is a little bit faster running. So let me pull myself back up here. Stop sharing my screen. All right, so the idea here is that we're going to start kind of exploring these stacks to some degree based on regulatory and policy level making. So I want to just stop here. I'll take 2 minutes. I'm going to turn on my stopwatch, if I can do that. So reset this guy. I'm going to take 2 minutes like we did in the past. I'm guessing that there won't be as many questions as last time, because I think, you know, this is our second day through this material. But I'm going to stop here and kind of give you 2 minutes to ask questions, all right? So, and I'm turning my mic off, so if it seems quiet, it is. Okay, got my questions. Let's see. Number one, okay, so I'm going to come back to the slides really fast. So the SaaS is software as a service. PaaS is platform. Platform as a service. And then infrastructure as a service is the last one. So to me, it's either software. Sometimes when I look at these models, it's either, I hope I'm off mute. Oops, make sure I'm off mute. I am. So to me, oftentimes it's software as a service or not. And then it's me inheriting different layers in the stack. And how deep do I want to go? So whether it's platform as a service or infrastructure as a service, to me, those become pretty collapsible. All right. Let's see. Have I ever heard of OpenShift? Yeah, I have heard of OpenShift. So I've been involved with some of the OpenShift stuff that has been going on with the Linux Foundation, at least conversations there. So I agree, pretty cool stuff. And then can you tell us what we're going to be doing with SSH? We are doing nothing with SSH. So what SSH was really just a comment here that this is just a way of understanding layers of responsibility. So the idea here is that we have the physical safeguards, which are the actual machines themselves, which are going to be almost all the time moved to the Amazon facility. If I'm running my own physical machines and running my general technical safeguards and running my application-specific technical safeguards, then I'm really not using cloud computing at all. So really, at a minimum, I'm moving my physical safeguards away to my cloud service providers, whether that's Amazon, Google, Rackspace, Microsoft, whatever that might be. Right, so then the general technical safeguards and the application-specific technical safeguards are up to me. So it's typically my responsibility to manage encryption. It's usually my responsibility to manage backups. It's usually my responsibility to set up SSH if I want to have remote access to the servers that are being managed. It's my responsibility to set up authentication, logins and passwords. It's my responsibility to set up access controls or those policies that we saw in S3. So we're not doing anything with SSH. Just the idea here is that those two bottom kind of large bullet points are my responsibility. All right, so that was the point there. Okay, so and then I learned that I'm on the big screen in the classroom, so that's pretty cool. So and we have 20 people on viewing right now, and if I do the quick math in my head, that's the entire class. So in terms of who I know is sharing, so that's pretty awesome. So if I return to this S3 instance, right? If I return to this guy, and I stop this and come back here for a second. If I return to this, you all remember this fella. All right, if I was to go to that and then ask you to put your credit card information in your named folder that you created on Monday. First of all, you can't access it. But if I was to ask you to do that, yeah, how many of you would be comfortable with that? It's a rhetorical question here, right? You don't all have to email me that you wouldn't be comfortable with it, of course. But you probably wouldn't feel real comfortable based on knowing the logins and passwords that I have and knowing the lack of encryption that I have going on in there. And is generally, yeah, it's not really your thing. So would you consider this a regulatory issue or is it a policy issue from what I've been talking about so far? Well, I'm not a merchant, right? I'm not an individual kind of responsible for dealing with PCI DSS. I'm not claiming to be. I'm not claiming to be a merchant dealing with HIPAA data or FERPA data, right? Make no claim on that. So really, this is 100% a policy issue. You would not be comfortable with it because of the horrendous policies that I have in place on our cloud infrastructure. And you can see that those are policies that are my responsibility. Those aren't policies that are Amazon's responsibility, right? Now, if I was a merchant and I was dealing with PCI, not only would you as a customer be concerned, but I would also not be certified as a PCI authorized merchant, because I'm not hitting the regulatory requirements that they have based on the policies that I'm implementing, right? So let's go back to here. So hopefully you're seeing that. No way would you put your credit card information in there. And you should see that this is probably pretty much a policy issue. So if I was to take a slightly deeper look here at PCI, this PCI DSS, it's not Amazon that sets policy. It's also not Amazon that sets really the regulatory environment. So the Security Standards Council is who's responsible for these cloud guidelines for PCI DSS. All right, so it's not Amazon, it's not me, but we need to respond to them. So the PCI policy basically says that cloud security is a shared responsibility. Hold on. But it's a shared responsibility between the cloud service provider, Amazon, in our case, and clients, meaning me, the people that set up these, that use cloud for infrastructure. If payment data is stored, processed, or transmitted in this environment, PCI DSS applies to that entire environment and will typically involve validation of both the cloud service provider's infrastructure and the client's usage of that infrastructure, right? So if you think about those layers of responsibility, Amazon has made the claim, if you recall, that they are PCI compliant. And what that means is that at that infrastructural layer, they are compliant on DSS, PCI DSS. Are they compliant at the operating system layer? Are they compliant at the application layer? Nope, that's my responsibility. So really, to be certified as an organization that's using cloud infrastructure, I need to work with a cloud organization that is certified down at that layer, because I don't have access at that low physical layer. But then I also have to be certified myself. So the responsibility is between the client and the cloud provider for managing these security protocols. And you can't just assume that it's the responsibility of the cloud infrastructure for all PCI DSS requirements, right? So I think I'm still showing, yeah, okay. The idea here is that I have a bunch of different service models that can apply, and this is in the PCI DSS world. So I have a bunch of different service models that can apply. I can use software as a service for PCI DSS. I can use platform as a service, and I can also use infrastructure as a service. I'm not bound to use one of these service models based on healthcare data, educational data, or credit card data. I'll just stick with those three, right? So none of those regulatory environments say you must use one of these three service models. So the idea here is that the blue bar at the bottom is my cloud organization, and the top is me as a client using cloud infrastructure as a merchant who collects credit card data. All right, so if I don't want to deal too much with Amazon, in the case of software as a service, I'm still probably responsible for some of my data and interfaces. If I'm, at least over on the right is software as a service, you can see that if I'm getting pretty comfortable at handling technology, I can move over to the left as a platform as a service or infrastructure as a service, where I may get down to the virtual network infrastructure. I could even take that further and say, you know what, I'm going to handle all of my hypervisors as well. So I mean, I can move these bars to where I'm comfortable with as an organization, having the human resources and the time and the inclination to work up and down these layers, okay? There are even models out there. I think is it Cube, the one that's on the phone? You have your phone and it's got that cube on it. So I think that's an entirely managed, a fully managed software as a service model that I, as a merchant vendor, really don't have to even manage the data. That organization is PCI, the Cube organization is PCI DSS compliant, and whether or not they use Amazon is really not my problem, but they have essentially certified that entire stack, that software as a service stack, that I then, as kind of a third vendor in this model, use them, and they may use cloud infrastructure. I don't particularly know, nor do I particularly care, as long as that entire stack is certified. All right. So if I come back to the screen share, gotta keep looking where this is. Okay. So here's another kind of view at some of the these requirements. So you can see over on the left side we have these PCI DSS requirements. So whose responsibility is it? Who? Meaning me, the user of the cloud infrastructure, or them being Amazon Cloud Services. Whose responsibility is it to install and maintain a firewall to protect cardholder data? Well, if it's software as a service, it falls a lot onto the cloud infrastructure. But the others, it's both of our responsibilities. And what I think the point here is that if you look at this, there are only a few cases, if we look at infrastructure as a service and platform as a service, which is where we've kind of been hanging out at over here, because we really haven't looked too deeply at software as a service. Take a look at what the cloud service provider is actually responsible fully for when it comes to the PCI DSS requirement. And fundamentally, it's 9. It's restricting physical access to cardholder data. The physical access management, all right? And really, it's only my responsibility for, you can see 4 and 5 there, the encryption of encrypt transmission of cardholder data across public open networks, and then antivirus software. Okay. Good. So the idea here is that it's not just me, or it's not just the cloud service provider, but it's actually a combination of both up and down that entire stack. Now, I will say this, again, where you move on that stack, both doesn't necessarily imply 50-50 ownership. So there may be percentage ownerships across these, but the point is that both are going to be involved. So the client, so if I'm looking at an example of protecting stored cardholder data, the client, meaning me using the cloud infrastructure, is generally responsible for the manner in which that information is secured, all right? So what the format is, whether it's in flat files or in databases, but it's me that has the responsibility for that. Data retention, how long do I keep the data, is defined also by me. So a retention schedule or a deletion schedule is going to be controlled by the client. The cloud service provider controls the actual storage areas, and then the use of controls to prevent unintended or some kind of odd retention of the data, or kind of normal retention of the data through backups, also needs probably to be managed by myself and the cloud service provider. So the point here on this example, and you'll see I have 2 more examples, is that I'm not just pushing everything to the cloud service provider when dealing with the different regulatory environments, and the policies that get set in place to respond to those regulatory environments are distributed between me and the cloud service provider. So transmission, the encryption of transmission, so the encryption of transmitted cardholder data. So how does that cardholder data actually, kind of ride the line? So transmission is typically controlled, again, by me. The underlying technology, right, again, is controlled by the cloud service provider. Prevention and unintended transmission outside of pretty much the physical box to where that data sits is the responsibility of the cloud service provider, kind of this physical access, and I just don't want it to kind of shoot out of that computer. I don't know what that would even look like, but I don't want it to leave that computer, all right? But the client is actually responsible for how it's transmitted kind of within my own environment. So for example, if I have a couple different virtual machines, so if I was to come back here, I'll show you, stop, come back here, and I was to come back here. So this would be my environment. So how the information is shared via S3 data repositories, or how it's shared if I set up a couple virtual servers in the cloud, how I move it from one machine to another. That would be my own internal environment. I've set up, say, 25 servers in 25 different S3 buckets. I may move that data internally amongst myself. That would be my responsibility. That's the point of that last one. So how it looks how it may be transmitted out of that 25-25 environment, that falls onto the cloud service provider. So slide up here. All right. Restrict physical access to cardholder data. Okay, so just don't even look at those bottom bullet points. If I'm restricting physical access to the cardholder data, you already know who's responsible for that. It's the cloud service provider. I don't even know where the computers are located. And in fact, I think I told you before, quite often my data is distributed. So some of it'll be in Council Bluffs, some of it'll be, I forget, Kentucky. I forget where the other physical Google infrastructures are. You know what? I don't even know where the Amazon, I couldn't even tell you where the Amazon physical infrastructure is. So, and a lot of times they don't even let you go visit. What would be the point of driving to Council Bluffs and saying, can I see my data? It doesn't even make sense. So restricting the physical access to the cardholder data is really falls on the cloud service provider. And like that bottom one, they don't even know where their data is. As long as it's in the US, if it needs to be in their US, according to regulatory issues, that's the policy that I have to have, or it needs to be in the EU, or it can't be, on the same server as a competing server. I may have some regulatory issues that I need to respond to, and then my policy kind of goes in place around that. So, maybe we can't really separate policy from regulatory. The idea here is that if I'm looking at PCI DSS or HIPAA or FERPA, that I've got some regulatory environment that I need to respond to. And if I was to sorry to cruise back up, but these 12 would be the requirements, the regulatory requirements under PCI DSS. And I hope I'm still showing them. It's good. So these would be the kind of the regulatory requirements. So the policy that I put in place, say, to protect stored cardholder data, that can vary between your organization and my organization. Encrypt transmission of cardholder data across open public networks. Well, that encryption can be different between you and between me. So those are the policies that you and I put in place according to a response to these requirements, or in response to these regulatory requirements, okay? So the point is here, we really can't separate policy, what I do on a day-to-day basis, from the regulatory environment. And I can't just assume, I'm gonna stop this, I can't just assume that if I'm using cloud infrastructure, that regulatory environment only applies to the cloud service provider, and that the policies in response to that regulatory environment only apply to the cloud service provider. It depends. It depends on if I'm using software as a service, platform as a service, or infrastructure as a service, or maybe thinking it as a kind of a gradient. As I inherit more responsibility in the stack, then I clearly inherit more policy decision making in response to the regulatory environment that this entire stack is under. All right, I'll say that again. So if I was to look at it as, if I was to, again, to look at, say, PCI DSS, and I was, again, sorry for moving back and forth like that. If I was to look at PCI DSS, whether I'm using software as a service, platform as a service, or infrastructure as a service, the same regulatory environment applies, all right? So infrastructure as a service does not have a more lax PCI DSS regulatory environment than, say, software as a service does. The same regulatory environment applies to each one of these service models. The question then becomes, who implements the policy in response to that regulatory environment? If it's infrastructure as a service, I, as the client, inherit much more policy decision making than I would if I'm using software as a service. I can use either. It's just who's going to be setting the policies on those. All right. So hopefully that's making good sense, and hopefully I was showing that as a screen. So I was good. Oops. Okay. So oops. Well, I think analytically, I can think of them. I can think of policy as something, and I can think of regulatory as something, right? But in reality, they kind of collapse onto one another. I don't set policy without some regulatory environment in mind, and I don't have a regulatory environment to which no policy is going to apply. So I really can't disintermediate them. So if you recall, the title, I think, was Disintermediating Regulation and Policy. And what I'm going to tell you is that you really can't. They're kind of connected. Regulatory is not something that I set myself. It's usually set by the federal government. It's set by industry groups. But I respond to that regulatory environment through my local policies. And my policies are going to vary up and down based on my choice of infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, or software as a service. The amount of authority that I have on making those policy decisions varies based on the different models that I use. So regulatory defines policies being used. You could say it another way. The policies that are being used are in response to my different regulatory environments. And I hope you see this too. It's really important that we kind of see this connection. So I'm going to stop here again for like 2 minutes and just kind of make sure that there aren't kind of lingering questions on the connection between policy, regulatory, and the different models that I have. You know, the infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. So 2 minutes, and then I'll come back on and wrap things up, okay? And again, I'm turning off my mic for 2 minutes, so if it seems quiet, it's because my mic's off. All right, everybody. A little less than 2 minutes, but it's pretty quiet. So if you still have something to send me, feel free. I may not answer it during class. I can answer it kind of after, after we're done here. So I make sure that I respond to everybody's stuff that's here. So let me wrap this up here for today. I'm going to go back. Oh, okay, hold on. So I do have a question. It says, would you say that regulatory structures are the determining factor of the policy you need to use? The 3 levels, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service, would then be different levels of policy that is left to you, the client, ultimately still adjustable by the client. So yes, I would say that. So the question, I'll say it again, would you say that regulatory structures, okay, I'm going to pull this back. I don't know if I'm showing myself, that regulatory structures are the determining factor of policy you need to use? Yeah, they're probably not the determining factor, but a determining factor in the policies that I need to use, right? So yes, I would agree with that. And then the second follow-on question is the 3 levels, these 3 kind of, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service would then be the different levels of policy decision-making, I would add in this, but they're the different levels of policy control or policy decision-making that's left to me as a client. So if I choose software as a service, my decision-making at the policy level is lower than it would be if I was using platform as a service, And the greatest amount of policy setting or policy decision making for me as a client is at the infrastructure as a service level. That's where I have the most autonomy, but it requires the most work too, right? I mean, just because I have autonomy doesn't mean, actually probably because I have the autonomy, it probably means that it's more work. However, are those adjustable? Could I start out as infrastructure as a service and slowly kind of say, yeah, I'm tired of doing this and let's move up to the platform level, and then I'm tired of doing that too, let's move up to the software level? Yeah, sure, of course. Or likewise, the other way. If I'm software and I say, you know, I'd really like a little bit more control down to the operating system level, could I move from software as a service down to infrastructure as a service? You bet, 100%. So very, very, very good question. And yes, and I'll post this question again just in case you didn't get it here on the video. So good question. Thanks, John. All right, so let me pull up my kind of last issue here. So this should make a little bit more sense now. So if we look at regulatory and policy, this is a slide I had earlier in the talk. So I have this idea that says regulatory is motivated by clients and data. So it's really motivated by the kind of the environment that I as a client and the data that I want to store or kind of manage. You know, it's kind of motivated by where I as a client sit. Do I sit in the healthcare industry? Do I sit in the credit card industry? Do I sit in the educational industry? Do I sit in some other industry that, you know, that has its own kind of regulatory structure? Now, some are going to be formal and some are going to be less formal. The ones we've been looking at are pretty formal. But so motivation, it's motivated by clients, and then policy is motivated by pretty standard systems administration. And kind of following on to John's question, I would say policy is motivated by standard system administration and where I want, as a client, where I want to sit on those different models. So do I want to sit at the infrastructure? Do I want to sit at the platform? Do I want to sit at software? So it's motivated by standard system administration and where I want to reside on that stack. Platform management is distributed across the company and the cloud company, and that's going to vary, right? So it's going to kind of move up and down. It's based on this, you know, who has the decision making at the policy, you know, where I want those policies to reside, and then, you know, where that hardware is actually going to reside. And I think in the case of cloud, the hardware is always going to reside with the cloud infrastructure. And then social responsibility, there's responsibilities of the cloud provider, at least at that physical. They do have a responsibility at that physical layer, but those responsibilities may, from a cloud perspective, move up the entire stack if we're looking at software as a service. So I would say that me as a client also have legal or ethical responsibilities, just like the cloud provider does, and those responsibilities can come up and come down as I, as the client, choose infrastructure, platform, or software as a service. So those responsibilities are going to be, they're going to vary between the two, right? Decision making and authority and control, I think you can probably see this, these are going to shift as well. So they become embedded in my needs, all right? So the decisions, they really become embedded as to what I need regulatory-wise and what I need to control from a policy perspective. The decisions and authority on those decisions, it's highly distributed between, typo there, but highly distributed between the client and the cloud provider. And to the question, yeah, it really depends on where you fall in software, platform, or infrastructure as a service. Issues are going to raise up like due diligence on the data, risk management on the data or the operating systems or the infrastructure, data acquisition, you know, how I actually bring data into the system, data storage and persistence. Do I actually, you know, remove data, backup data? And then data decommissioning. How do I actually remove data? And again, you can see that something like, oh gosh, say data storage and persistence. Well, it kind of depends on where I sit or on what service model I kind of fall into when it comes to cloud computing, and then who has responsibilities on those particular policies in response to the regulatory environment within which these policies reside, right? Okay, so you know, these are just some examples here. So that's a wrap up for today. So remember, assignment 2 is due this Friday. Take a look at the specs. They should be really similar to the first. Okay, so motivation is the first issue. Then you pick the second issue, organizational structure, decision making. Please don't forget to back up your stuff, back up your statements with literature or websites, let me know where you're getting some of the arguments that you're using. So if you want me to take a look at your paper, please send it to me as a Word document. I'll take a look at it, I'll track changes, add comments, and then send it back to you in short order. I know that we're getting close. Tomorrow's really, tomorrow by kind of the end of business day will be the last I'll accept feedback for papers. So 5 o'clock I think is a good thing for us. Have a great weekend. Enjoy it outside, and I'll see you on Monday, right? So we'll be in class and we'll do Jeopardy. I think Girl Scout cookies are over. I don't think I can buy them anymore, so we'll have to find something else. So awesome. I look forward to talking to you and seeing you on Monday. And I'll stay on, but you can all, we're done. Yeah, thanks. Thanks, everybody.